FCC TV is currently having issues broadcasting, so Sophie is going to record here and put out a message and work with OCOM while we're starting, because it's not on the live stream or broadcast right now.
Okay, so.
Yep.
It's good to go. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Monday, May 1st, 2023 work session of the Falls Church City Council. We're going to go ahead and get started. Cindy, did you want to do roll and then we'll pick up Phil as we go along?
Be glad to, Mayor. Ms. Conley? Here. Mr. Duncan?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Ms. Hardy? Here. Ms. Leon? Mrs. Scott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mayor Tarter?
Here. And we would like a motion to, all right, does anyone want to make a motion about Phil's?
I move that City Council approve electronic participation by Phil Duncan in this meeting for medical reasons pursuant to the City Council's policy for remote participation in City Council meetings as adopted by Resolution 2023-06.
Second.
All right.
And yes, I will call the roll. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon? Mrs. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, council. That passes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Shields, I guess we just have one item on the agenda, which means it'll probably be a late night, but why don't we try to work to make this in one of the short ones, because we got a few long ones coming up, I think. But did you want to start, or does Kieran want to go ahead and do a presentation of sorts?
So we don't have we have one slide that we can share.
Okay.
Actually, it's two slides, but is a background piece for some questions that we've gotten since the last council meeting. I would just note this is the last work session on the budget. What would be the desired outcome from tonight's discussion is as close to landing as possible in terms of what the council would like in terms of final policy decisions on the budget, so that staff can then prepare the documentations and have the ordinance reflecting the council's direction ready for you on your docket next week. I also want to just acknowledge that we have responses to the budget questions, and I think we're at question 30 now. So council, thank you for your engagement on that, and hopefully these responses have been useful to you. And if there are any follow-up questions, we'll do the best we can tonight to answer or provide any additional information on the questions that have been asked so far. The one of the questions, so in the markup, the council has looked at some of the issues that have come up from the public. It's a list of potential items for the use of council contingency. And some of those are in the category of one-time expenditures for which one-time funds could be used either underspending in the current year's budget or revenue surpluses in the current year budget, or capital reserves if they are for capital related projects. One question that staff has gotten since the last meeting is, or actually request from council, is some more analysis on the capital reserves, kind of in service to a discussion about using some additional measures of the city's capital reserves to reinvest in core infrastructure, specifically in improvements within the right of way, to catch up on our paving, bike facilities as we repave, pedestrian crossings, sidewalks, and signals. And so we do have some information to help inform the council discussion on the potential use of capital reserves and some different scenarios the council should be mindful of about using capital reserves. I think that's it for introductory comments. Karen, are there any things that you would add, or before we put the discussion on the capital reserve up on the screen, are there other things the council would like to discuss first before we go into that somewhat technical discussion?
Anything? All right, why don't you go ahead and the big slide up.
Okay, so we have a slide that is up on the wall right now, and it's also in the form of a handout that Ms. Bawa has provided to the city council. And on the first page is this chart of numbers, and then on the second page are some scenarios with some variables, including the Virginia Tech payment. If that for some reason gets delayed or does not come in, what does that mean for capital reserves? And then we also want to have a discussion about tax yield from West Falls. And so we've broken that out in this chart, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bawa so she can walk us through that. But the key thing for the council to think about when we talk about tax yield for West Falls is back in 2017 when we had the bond referendum. And ever since then, we have considered the tax yield as being a contribution from the West Falls project to help cover the debt for the high school. But we know, and we knew at that time, that in fact, using that tax yield will be a council decision. There's nothing automatic about that. And so here we pull the tax yield out, at least the modeled tax yield, so you can see what happens to those projections if that tax yield from the 10-acre West Falls site is not there, and what that means for capital reserves. So Ms. Bawa, I don't think I've stolen the punchline, but I wanted to give a little bit of context before we
Not
jump.
devilish with the details, so. Mayor Tartar, good evening, members of the council. So we have in front of you the capital reserve projection chart. And as Mr. Shields said, it has a lot more parsing out this time. So we see what are the various factors that are counting in over here on this chart. It is a 9-year window from fiscal year 22, a couple back, all the way through 2030. And debt service, as we all know, for the debt that has been issued for high school and city hall and library and other capital based on the CIP, that is net of the funding that we have dedicated towards payment of debt. And then CIP, this is the first year where we have dedicated some CIP. As part of CIP, we have dedicated some capital reserve. And over the next year, 6 years, from 24 onward to 29, we have a use of 11.5 million. Fiscal year 22 shows the funding that was allocated, the year-end funding that was allocated for use. So that is, and third column is the paving. And based on the direction we received from council last work session, paving and other core infrastructure improvements, including paving, sidewalk, traffic signals, unfunded needs are a total of 2.4 million. And the intent here is to fund it as a one-time need over the next 3 years, fiscal year 24, 25, and 26. So you see it's equal amounts of 800,000 towards paving. Then the next column of additions shows what we are adding or we are projected to add to the fund balance. The first few years from fiscal year 22 all the way down to 25 are the proceeds from the ground lease from West Falls. Fiscal year 22 also has some money that was put aside for we got from the parking lot sale, 612,000. So there are some other numbers in there. It was 6.5 from the ground lease and then another million of additions that were done.
How much is the Founders Row VC?
The Founders Row.
400.
It was 1 point. 1 second.
Instead of $1 million.
No, it was 1 point, I want to say it was 1.3. So for the,
Founders Row VC.
that would be.
Mhm.
And And then, so that balance column shows what at the end of each fiscal year projected year-end capital reserve balance would be after addressing the debt service, CIP needs, paving, and any additions that are made to the capital reserve. So looking at it from 24 all the way down, we see that, sorry, before I go there, I did want to mention that in the additions in fiscal year 2026, we are showing that 9.8. That includes the land lease, a million something, and also 8.43 from the Virginia Tech. So that's that number, fiscal year 2026 of the additions. And it's significantly greater than the years before.
And 1.9 from Virginia Village is coming in FY '24.
Is coming in 24, yes.
Feel good about that.
No. So let me restate that. The pilot is if the assessed value generated a tax yield of less than $1 million in 2025, then it could impact the pilot. But I don't think that would be the case even without the senior component getting started. That's right, a ramping up. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so how long does that go for, by the way? Is that a 5-year deal, a 4-year deal?
So it ramps up just as shown here. So $1 million comes on board in 2025, 1.5 the year after, 2 million, then 3 million. And then in 2029, there is no agreement anymore, so they pay full taxes.
Got it. All right, thank you.
So you're
Okay.
referring
Sorry, go ahead.
to the pilot, that's for the whole project, not just for the assisted.
Yeah, but I wanted to
Okay.
know whether the assisted living not happening would somehow impact the
Got it.
pilot. Because the pilot is sort of based on what the tax yield would
Right.
be. It's an agreement in advance of
Right.
what the tax value and payments would be.
For your ending column, Karen, does that assume that we are adding the tax yield in there? Your last column.
Yeah, so the balance without the tax yield and including the Virginia Tech, 8.43 in 2026 is shown in the balance, the first gray column balance, which starts in 23 or ends in 23 at 12.6 million and then ramps up a little bit. And then after the ground lease payments are taper off, it ramps up a little bit more with the Virginia Tech to 14.8 million. And then since we do not have any promised payments after that, and we are drawing down for CIP based on the 6-year CIP that is in front of you as part of the proposed budget, we are projecting a year-end balance in fiscal year 2030 of 2.6. And just want to point out that CIP goes only all the way through 29, so there are no needs in 2030 in there. So without that, the balance is 2.6 million. And then the next column, which says WF tax yield for the West Falls, shows based on the fiscal impact model that was projected on for that project. It copies those numbers over, and then, of course, the ending balance with that shows greater fund balance. That is,
So if I could just stop you, Ms. Conley had a question, I think probably somewhere in the middle there, so.
Just on the additions, 27, 28, 29, 30. So this is again, total pie in the sky, but if we have another mixed use development or if we have another profit, that will show up there. It just doesn't exist yet. But that's something we can not exactly count on, but the way things have been going, those numbers are not set in stone in the 200,000s.
yeah, and
We're not going to make huge decisions based on that. I just want to make sure.
right, and I do want to add to that part here, 8.43. I mean, it is their plan, but it's not there. It's a projection. So should anything change with the project,
We go back to the core infrastructure column. So the 2.4 million is what was requested or is met as unfunded needs by DPW. Are they saying that they would prefer spreading it out over 3 years? That's how much they can execute on? It's $800,000 worth per year.
So this 800,000, it were to go all to paving, we bring the budget to, 1.25, and they are comfortable there if it's spent that way.
But if we were to split it across sidewalks and crosswalks and bike lanes, like, could we use more than 800, I guess is the question. Or is that all they could spend?
I think this is a combination of kind of financial planning of, because we do have some variables like the $8.3 million payment from Virginia Tech that is a big variable. Other things like that, we thought it prudent to step it across a
I was
couple
about
of
to use
years.
the word adjective prudent, but I didn't know whether,
So from
that
an
kind of need for more
execution
than that.
perspective, DPW is working through its repaving list. That is pretty easy to administer. We have a list of the streets and we grade all the streets. And the more money that's provided, the deeper in that list we will go. So if the full 2.4 were in 1 year, that probably might be a challenge just because it'd be so far out of step of what Virginia Paving is used to from the city, of being able to get them to plan ahead to do that work for us. So we could get you more information on that, but this is a strategy that we did talk about with DPW, and they definitely thought this was executed.
About sidewalks. So we talked about sidewalks a fair amount. Is that something that can be easily outsourced and ramped up?
It is outsourced. The contracting there is a little bit more difficult, longer lead times. So we'd get back with you on that.
Is that sidewalk? Go ahead.
And so while I guess while 800 could clearly be spent on paving is what I'm hearing you say, I guess I'd like to make sure we take care of signals and sidewalks as well.
Yeah, I think the signals and the paving are the two biggest dollar amounts. And we would be able to spend large amounts of those areas quickly.
Specifically on paving, Dave, you have a question. Why don't you just go ahead and ask it?
So what if we took the 8.3 million for Virginia Tech out of these numbers? And what is the status of that project right now?
So that's a segue into the next chart.
So,
Yeah, the chart, yeah.
But we're actually comparing two different things. One side's capital reserves, one side's fund balance.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna tell you. That the reserves in itself would drop if you're looking at a balance of 2.6 and you took 8.4 out. To exhaust the capital reserve without the tax yield. So looking at the available balance projections on the second side of that sheet. And on the screen, we have, so the two green add bars are the of 20% is the policy ceiling, the target, and then 15% of the policy floor based on the current available fund balance we have.
I thought 20% was only the target when we have those two debt to expenditure ratios that we care
That's
about.
correct. Payout is not done.
FY 28. And then what is the target after that when we get back to where we need to be for payout ratio? 12 and 17. So the line shift down.
Tip down, but that's unassigned fund balance. We're not feeding the unassigned fund balance right now, but they do have. Right now, capital reserve and permanent reserve. If that's what it-
But the bracket of 15 to 20%, those green bars essentially wouldn't be the same green bars when we are doing better on our debt to expenditure and payout ratios.
The three scenarios in care of the available fund balance, the AD one, which is the purple line way at the top, which is above the 20% target, includes West Falls tax yield and the Virginia Tech sales in the capital reserve. And each year from fiscal year 23 all the way to 29, it shows that uh, the available fund balance would be ahead of the policy target. Next one is the turquoise AB2 line, which is, it includes the Virginia Tech sale, but excludes the West Falls tax sale. And that is following the policy of being above the target till about 27, then being above the 4 all the way to 20. Have a corrective cure in our policy that if we fall below 4 or target, we have room a couple of years to come back up. And then AB3 is the worst case where it excludes the West Falls tax yield and Virginia yield. The reason I'm showing you this option of excluding the West Falls tax yield for the reason that that is money that's going to be coming through as operating. And then it is a policy discussion if we're going to make enough, a policy to bring that money over to the capital reserve, or if we're going to use that in the operating in lieu of, so that is a policy discussion. And so that option AB3 states that we are, after 26, we are below the target, and then after 27, we're well below the minimum requirement of the policy. Of that requirement.
So you had asked for an update on the Virginia Tech project. It is going through the Fairfax County rezoning process. We have not been given any indications of slowdown or any major problems with that. And we do check in on a regular basis with Fairfax County and with the development team. So I don't have any negative news, but it is an environment where financing is very difficult to get, and we are seeing projects be delayed or be canceled all through Northern Virginia and across the country. So so the lack of bad news is not necessarily an indication that when it comes time to get this financed, that everything will go smoothly.
I won't ask you to repeat that, but that was pretty well done. Anyway, thank you.
What's the date of closing, outside date of closing?
It is in March of 2025.
March of 2025. So that's 2 years from now, basically?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a pretty good ways. And I presume it's contingent on getting a rezoning approval?
That's correct.
Okay.
We talked about West Falls tax yield. Does this include any tax yield assumptions from the 3 other projects underway? Broad and Washington, Founders 2, Founders 1.
This is the model that was done and revised with all the exact numbers that we received for the West Falls ground lease and but no. Okay.
2 or Broad and Washington.
That's right. This is a West Falls specific modeling exercise.
So the assumption is all that tax yield would go into operating. Unless we don't need to spend all of it, and then we can decide
Right.
what to do with that revenue.
So one way to think of this, that debt service column, that is the increase in debt service relative to where we were in 2021 before we issued debt for the high school. I believe for the high school and library and City Hall. So for the 3 projects, this was the net increase in debt service. I would think that we wouldn't take all of the tax yield for at a minimum, the tax yield to cover that debt service would be used to cover the debt service. And then anything in addition to that becomes council decision, whether to shore up capital reserves or to spend the money.
Or Phil's listening to lower the tax rate.
That's right. Yes.
With respect to pavement, you talked about a little while ago. So what's your cycle on repaving? Is it 10 years? Is that my recollection, or am I thinking of something else?
So it varies from street to street. The grading occurs on an annual basis, and so that really is what drives it. But there's some streets, as our Director of Public Works has told us, that begin to show that cracking, after 5 years because of high moisture content or an insufficient base to the street. Other streets that have a good base to them and don't get a lot of traffic, they can last 15 to 20 years. So it does vary street to street.
And in terms of the requests, is that to do new sub base? Is that just to put a new top coat on, or what? Could you articulate a little bit more about what that is?
So it is basically to just to mill and repave. Where we do a full remediation of the sub base, we typically do that where we're getting a matching grant from the Commonwealth of Virginia, because that is so expensive. The business case for doing that is difficult to justify if it's just purely locally funded. The state does have a policy objective to get these streets up to condition, so they are using some state dollars to help localities do that.
And on these roads we're talking about, is it there in a normal cycle, but we just think that's too long, or is it like these are really bad condition? Like, in other words, where do these fall? Would this just be in any other year if we weren't talking about capital reserve usage? Would this just be like, well, they're just in the normal course of business, they're going to get repaved whenever they are? Or is this something like, well, there's some serious problems here, some serious defects that need to be corrected that are out of the ordinary?
I think the number of streets that are in our lowest rating that says, you need to repay them, is higher than it should be, than it has historically been. And that's because of, last year, prices were so high that the only paving we did was in partnership with Fairfax Water. So we didn't do some of the paving that the things were on the street. In addition, since 2011, where we really cut the budget, I think we have been underspending on paving, and so the number of streets that are in poor condition is higher than is historically been the case in the city.
And are you?
I have a personal anecdote on that front that I think is pretty demonstrative, which is, where my house is, where the bridge was rebuilt in 2018. The Arlington, one side's Arlington, one side's Falls Church. The side in Arlington has been repaved twice since the bridge was put in. We have yet to be repaved. So it's just like a super obvious example. You can drive from Arlington on a smooth street, come over the bridge, and then you're not. And it's just, our cycle is slower than our neighboring jurisdictions. I'm sure there are that's just the one I see every day. I'm sure there are other examples comparable. But that's an example of just the cycle itself, right?
And so you're saying the cycle has been lower or slower than since 2011?
That's right.
Are you accelerating the cycle, or is that kind of what the new normal is?
Well, ideally, what we'll be doing, we've been trying to kind of claw our way back, is to build that into the operating budget and the tax rate and just sustain it. We've built it back to $450,000 a year, which is still not adequate. And so this strategy would be to use capital reserves to catch up. And still, I will be coming back to you in next year's budget and every budget after that to try to get us up to a sustainable level of not needing to use one-time money for paving.
What do you think that number is?
Well, the Public Works Director has indicated 1.2 million a year
A year.
as our paving budget. So currently the budget has 1/3 of that.
Sure.
So on paving, if we do this kind of one-time injection of 800,000 year one, like if the list is however many streets long, does this get us like 20% of the way through the list? Like how big of a dent does that help? Because that would get you to 1.2 this year.
So
450 plus 800 would be 1.2. So it theoretically should be, for this year, we're all good. And then we have to do it again next year and next year. But
one variable is the pricing environment. And so that, last year, as indicated, the pricing for a lane mile was about 4 times higher than it was pre-pandemic. And so it was a kind of a crazy price. Those have normalized somewhat, or, they're not quite as extreme as they were. But that's a big variable in terms of how much we can get caught up. If the prices were that bad, we would come back to council and say, you know, we need to have a conversation about this. But the current indications are, I don't think we have final pricing from our contractors, but I think it will be a price that we feel that is, provides a value to the taxpayer.
But hopefully a 200% increase would make a significant catch up.
That's right.
Okay. Second question. While I'm sympathetic to the paving issues, I think what I'm most interested in by doing the paving is getting to the bike infrastructure, ADA ramps, kind of all the other stuff associated with redoing the street, right? And so if we do this, do we know how many places could get upgrades in bike infrastructure, whether it's new share markings, whether it's new ADA ramps? Because I guess that would be my my string to attach to the 800,000 is I'd want to make sure that all the things we hear from the public these days about making sure the streets are complete. And I know we don't officially have a complete streets policy, but I would love to make sure that when we do paving, we are doing all the other things for the other modes of transportation.
We are, as a matter of course, fixing ADA deficiencies whenever we repave, and also requiring the utility companies, whenever they are doing a project, that in their budget, they have to remediate the ADA issues, ramps specifically. Bike infrastructure, we will follow the bike master plan and put in all bike infrastructure in coordination with CPEDs in terms of what we've been working through with the community. And so that would be our commitment with this.
And I think the open question is, do we think all 800 should go towards paving, or can some of it go towards crosswalks and sidewalks in year one? Well, that's the question. I think staff, like, what can we execute on? Like, is it out of the 800 in year one, is it proportional where 700 or 500 goes towards paving and something else goes towards crosswalks and sidewalks and signals too? I mean, I think look to DPW and you all for that recommendation.
If we could, I'll try to get this to you before Monday night to have a little bit of a clearer breakout based on kind of the grading and the pricing and et cetera of what we'd be able to get accomplished with these dollars.
I guess while we're on sidewalks, my other request is with sidewalks, we've heard a number of suggestions and memos from the CACT. I think staff has some memos on recommended kind of sidewalk missing links. I feel like we need one big master list, and with both transparency so that the public knows, hey, here's where I am on this. I've requested Whittier sidewalks 3 times. I'm number 15 on the list. At least then I know I'm on the list. It'd be great to have a master list like that, and then both for prioritization as well as transparency for the public.
I would second that.
So the last discussion we had was about the use of the $1 million of ARPA dollars. But we can grow off of that and have a more comprehensive list.
By budget adoption, I'm just saying that if we are going to deploy reserves towards this, I think it'd be a healthy exercise, have one master list of all sidewalk, crosswalk improvements.
I think it would be amazing. And that way, if someone calls with concern, you can say, yeah, here you are. And it eliminates, or, oh, yours isn't on here. Let's figure out where it fits in the list.
I really echo the sentiment from 2 council members I've heard that it's really important to have some sense of what are we prioritizing for the 24 and 300K and 25. And, you know, being able to communicate that benefit is really important, because I've heard questions, you know, multiple times as to what the status is of that. If there's any way to get some clarity on what that balance is between street paving and sidewalk repairs, I think that the way that DPW have structured on page 94 of this budget is that street paving includes repairs to concrete sidewalks, maintain ADA compliance. So I worry that it's commingled in there, that you're not going to get the distinct benefit, right? Which is clear between the paving and the sidewalk, right? As particularly the ones that are supporting. So I would love to get some better insight on kind of that 800. Sure.
All right, further comments, Mr. Shields? Do you have an additional presentation? Is that it? What's that? Oh, sorry, Phil?
Well, I don't want to cut in if you're still in the middle of the presentation. I just sounded like you guys were beginning to come up with some stirring conclusions. So let me know if it's my turn to talk.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that.
I
Oh,
don't
yes,
wanna-
of course, please.
I don't want to interrupt more.
No,
data
no.
pre- Okay, good. Thank you. I'll be brief. So this is good, I think. As I understand what I hear you saying, we're gonna, basically take revenues that have been generated more or less through economic redevelopment over the years and funnel it into core infrastructure needs. I think that's a good thing. My question is, can we extend that to acknowledge that the taxpayer rate could be tapered down in a continuing pattern from last time's budget, much less than last time's budget, much more modest, but we could taper down the tax rate by a penny without having to cut schools or crossing guards or any of the other things that, might be in another scheme on the chopping block. What I'm hearing you say, these core infrastructure needs can be addressed without further budget, without budget cuts or reductions in spending. And I'm just curious to gauge the sentiment of the group on whether a small share of that money can be directed to tax rate relief as part of this coming budget that we'll vote on next Monday.
All right, so Phil was asking for further tax reductions.
Wyatt promised it in the out years.
So in terms of looking at the look ahead, when the tax yield starts to come online and the first payment of the $1 million and the as the mayor referred to it as the pilot, that would be an open discussion for tax rate reductions. And council may have other thoughts on that, but that's certainly one that is coming in the next fiscal year.
I quickly looked up the tax yield from Broad and Washington. On the low end, it's about $1.1 million. Founders 2 is about half a penny as well. So those probably come online around FY 25, 26 as well, I think.
On the West Falls tax yield, the pilot, we also have a tax credit payment in the equal amount that goes, right? So it's not for the first 2 or 3 years, when in the years where we have the real estate tax assessment set, we give them an equal amount of tax credit payment. So I do not know in the fiscal impact model if this 1 million is over and above that, or if it is inclusive of that.
Yeah, I guess
To
what
get
would
the
be,
C,
Then we're making an equal payment and this 1 million is gone.
we should ask the CFO what the answer is.
Well, I think the point is well taken. This will be $1 million that we don't currently have today. It will be new money. And there is an economic development agreement where they pay their taxes, and then through the EDA, that money is refunded back while they're under construction. But we, in 2026, in 2025, relative to this fiscal year, there'll be $1 million that the city will retain. That's correct.
I guess I would say that's good information. I would say 2 things. One, it would be helpful, I think, to have a list. I mean, you've got it here in these documents to some degree, but running through each of the anticipated revenue streams, I guess, Virginia Tech payment, parking lot sale, Founders Row VCs, et cetera, how much, when, and does it amount to more than $540,000? And if it does, would we be able to see our way clear in this year's budget to allocate that amount to tax rate relief, anticipating that some multiple of that number would almost certainly come online within the next, pick a number, 3 to 5 years, so that we could just keep up flexing the muscle of tax rate restraint, which is healthy, I think, as long as we're able to meet core infrastructure needs as expressed in the earlier discussion and as planned for in the drawdown of those reserves.
Ms. Conley?
Yeah, so just a quick question on the mechanism by how this happens. We decide this year we're going to take $800,000 out of capital reserves to pay for core infrastructure. The following 2 years, that's going to have to be decided by the council at the time again. Whereas with the CIP, we're passing a 5-year CIP, so we're essentially saying this is what we want to happen in the next 5 years. But this $800,000 is a one time with the expectation and hope that next year the council as it exists at that time would want to do the same thing. But there's no guarantee.
I think that's right. But I would also say for the CIP, those also will be a council decision. The council adopts a plan,
Right.
but you appropriate the money for the coming fiscal year. So you could decide not to appropriate it.
Right. But the CIP is a existing vehicle where
Yes.
you can point to and say, this is what we
Correct.
hope for. All we have here is 3 withdrawals on capital reserve. There's not an existing vehicle we can put that in
That's right.
unless we put it in the CIP, but that doesn't make sense to talk about long-term, that kind of long-term plan.
Yeah, I think the 800,000 would exist not in the CIP, but it would exist as a planning document that the city council has articulated to staff. This is the way we want to go, and we would plan accordingly, and we continue to model accordingly.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so, the proposal, as I understand it, on the tax rate cut is to tax the rate next year without cutting the operating expenses in the hopes that in future fiscal years, we'll make more money from one thing or another. But none of this comes on board in 2025. Is that right? The hoped for projects. Am I right?
Virginia Village,
Trying to understand that we're talking about operating expenses for next year. Without cuts in the operating expenses, we would basically, and cut the tax rate, we would basically be approving an unbalanced budget.
Oh, that's
The
a good
only way
question.
you could do that then would be to borrow yet again from various reserve amounts, using reserve amounts for operating expenses. So
That-
unless we can find cuts to the operating budget for next year, to reduce the tax rate next year would in essence be approving an unbalanced budget.
would we be cutting to draw down from reserves for core infrastructure needs? That is the question, obviously. And my understanding, which could be wrong, is that I'm wanting to allocate money which basically we have already earned and is sitting somewhere in a fairly easily identifiable location to be drawn down at some point. Some, would draw it down as early as, the reconciliation that we'll do on underspending for this year. Some will draw it down when the budget closes on June 30th. Some will draw it down as part of the FY 23-24 budget. But
So-
at some point, it's already been collected. If I'm wrong about that, then I just would need to understand what's different between what I understand and what the drawdown for core infrastructure needs is.
Bill, as I think about that, the difference is it's just a decision on how we're going to spend that money. Are we going to give an $800,000 tax cut, or are we going to spend that $800,000 investing in what our citizens are asking for? So that,
Yeah.
Oh, and Letty's got a difference there.
but so to build on that point though, like it's a limited use. It's 800,000 3 times versus the tax rate is sustained and you have to pay for it every year. And so looking at the additions column, Karen, all those numbers of the 1.3 from Founders or VC, the parking lot sale, Virginia Tech sale, the 1.9 million, that adds up to a lot of money, but all that is one-time money, right? The only ongoing money that we're talking about that we might get is the West Falls tax yield plus not listed Broad and Washington, Founders 1, Founders 2. That's ongoing money. And so the challenge, I mean, I understand and I share Phil's sentiment. I think we all do that we're doing economic development so that we can add to our tax base and eventually decrease the tax rate. The structural issue we have is we have a whole bunch of one-time money coming. Some of it may not happen. We don't want to counter chicken before they hatch. But how do you deploy one-time money responsibly outside of the tax rate? And I think core infrastructure is one of those things that we've heard consistently that we have not done a good job of. And that feels appropriate for kind of a 3-year catch-up, I guess. So it's as close to operating as we can get, but not a continuously committed operating like a tax rate cut decrease would be.
So,
Yep.
yeah, in weighing and balancing all of these things, I'd like us to review the policies that we committed to in order to get the interest rate that we did. And what did we commit to use our various fund balances for, and are we violating any of that? That would be a question on the fund balance use. And I think unless we can come up with cuts in the budget and recognize that we actually have requests from our citizens to increase the budget in a number of ways. I'd love to cut the tax rate, but I'd like to see the list of cuts that we're going to make to get to it. And then the other concern I have is the Virginia Tech concern. It strikes me that too much can go wrong with that. I think we have reason to believe that the projects that are in the ground are likely to finish, and that's all good. But relying to any significant extent on Virginia Tech at this point seems to me a bit dangerous, considering that none of it's really under our control at this point. It's under control of another jurisdiction, and it's under control of the vagaries of the market. It's not a situation where it's coming out of the ground, for example. So those would be just a couple thoughts I have in trying to balance all this.
I agree with Mr. Snyder on all of those points with regard to what's in progress versus what is the potential. And that's what gives me pause. And as much as I'd like to reduce the tax rate for everybody, including myself, I just don't think that is responsible. I think that the point about reviewing this 800,000 each year as well, like, so we decide on, let's say we decide on this right now, we've made this decision for this year, 800,000 for infrastructure. Then we have an opportunity to see what our end of year looks like, what other expenses. We have a long list of requests still that we aren't addressing. We can see which of those we can address, and then by hopefully FY25, we'll be able to see the revenue start. We'll have more actually concrete data on that. So just to put out there that the intent certainly is with all this development to reduce the tax rate over time, but not at the expense of providing our core infrastructure. And staff, paying for our staff too. That's another big thing we're investing in. Here's our people. So. I think I said that, I think I said out loud, I don't know if it was just a thought bubble or that we can make a different decision next year. Should this 800,000 not be effective, be, only a fraction of what we were looking for, market changes, interest rate changes, more information on Virginia Tech, more information on the senior center at West Falls, or, everything else that's kind of still up in the air a little bit. We'll have more information on that. Then I can make an even better informed decision. Putting it out there as the intent, and then looking what our reality is.
And we
Okay.
may even, and when we look at the FY23 closeout, we may have an opportunity to discuss this again, because you expect that we'll have surplus.
That's right.
What
So what-
magnitude are we comfortable? Are we comfortable sharing, like what order of magnitude yet?
You have to do the third quarter projections first.
If we want to move on to the various requests we've gotten. You have that on the slide, or is that?
Do we
make
have
it
that
On
up?
the first page of the staff report,
Yeah, so the community requests and council requests are listed right here.
there, I don't know if you all saw Joseph Shirizzi's memo from the ESC in conjunction with
Yeah.
speaking with a couple other organizations as well. There were additional requests, specifically with regard to staffing for the environmental and additional staffing and implementing the community energy action plan. An environmental department administrator and outreach specialist that even if it's part-time should be funded to help implement the two action plans that we're investing in. This came in an amendment. This is not on our list already, was not in the budget book, but after further discussions with that particular group and with the energy action plan in progress, that has been an additional request. So the original 80-some thousand and an additional request for that, just along the lines of discussing what we can use our, I know year ends one time, but in terms of discussing our budgets moving forward, I'd like to throw that on the list too.
Different than the 26,000.
It's different from the 26,000, which is half of the request from the 80,000 contingency.
It's different than the 27,000 that's further down the
Correct.
chart.
It's different. It's additional. It's not anything. Those were all included in the budget, the original budget book on page 316. This is an additional item.
Was there, so there was a position, was there a dollar amount?
This memo does not have a dollar. I presume he spoke with Andy about a dollar. No. This was April 28th.
Yeah, maintenance at 53. And 26 is,
Sorry, I'm confused. Is it in the budget book or
It is in the budget book. It's listed as an unmet need.
isn't that what we're taking care of in the?
The unmet needs.
The
include
unmet needs for management.
3,000, of which 26 is ongoing and 27 is one time.
Yeah, neither of those are a position. That's software,
Yeah,
management
None of those are
software,
position.
energy audit and
that's correct.
for PPA. So I just want to add that to the list. I'm not proposing that. It obviously can't even be filled in that contingency, but I want to continue discussing that as we move forward.
While we're talking about outreach specialists, we had heard from the East End area plan discussions that we were gonna have an outreach specialist. Is that already staffed and paid for?
So we are working through the procurement process on that. We don't have a final cost. The intent is for that to be a contracted position. And so we have some negotiation on rates and then have a discussion about the different functions with police, with planning, with other departmental functions of how this position could help us. So it is not built into the budget at this point. I'm anticipating that that could be a year-end discussion because it would be a contract with a term. We'd then evaluate it and make a decision in FY20.
Something we need to add to the list, bottom line.
I'm sorry, I'm giving too long of an answer. Yes, it does not need to be added to the
That
list.
is
I
a
don't.
good answer. Thank you.
What's your thoughts on these items, the budget, year end, versus now and in general? Do you all have a recommendation or thoughts?
So the one-time ones, I would say we can have that discussion in a month. Some of it will be revenue surplus, probably which will be a September discussion. So there'll be 2 bites at the apple on those. In terms of the ongoing costs, if we're just talking about council contingency, I think the city council will just need to kind of work through what your higher priorities would be on those items that are listed as the ongoing expenses. And
In a couple iterations on the sustainability front, we've taken that $53,000 request and split it so that one would be within this contingency fund, and then the rest of the balance could be determined based upon what our underspending was at year end. But that would allow several components of it that are included in $26,000.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused by some of these categories because some appear to be one time and others appear to be ongoing. I'm not sure that I agree necessarily or totally understand why things were slotted the way they were. But if I were to use the contingency, consistent with the earlier discussion about core services, there's nothing more core than safety, and that's the Broad and Spring Street. Each of these requests, by the way, have a lot of merit, but if we're going to triage, it seems to me that safety has to be number one. I hope it's not the only one, but safety has to be number one. And sustainability, I don't know, I'd like to see this looked at again, and it's hard to make these decisions without knowing about the third quarter 2023, which is part of why I've sort of asked for an indication, because it does affect what we do with this year's budget with regard to which of these requests. So,
The crossing guard would be that would be a new hire for the city. So I would recommend if that were to be funded, that be funded out of the council contingency. And then that's built into the tax rate and that can be sustained year in and year out.
How close are we to doing the speed camera?
Our goal is to, since that work session we had back in whenever that was, March, we've been moving forward with the contractor. So I will get back to you with a firm date, but we're pushing that forward. So, certainly by the next school year, our intent would have that.
I'm very familiar with the intersection. I agree with Dave that, safety is definitely important and that intersection needs work of some kind. And so if that speed camera can help at all times of day, not just the school crossing times and that should pay for itself within violations. That seems like a good first step. Then we can reevaluate whether we want a crossing guard next year.
yeah, except you're kind of not doing anything until the photo enforcement is put in place. So you're exposed for that period.
So the PSA would need to be hired and trained and equipped. And so that's not going to be an immediate action. I think probably both of them would be, what our conversation with St. James would be is our goal would be start of school next year.
So either way, nothing would happen before start of school next year.
That's
Is that what
correct.
you're saying? And would the red light running camera be in place by start of school next year?
I'll get back with you on that to confirm that, but that would be that's our goal.
Do we have the ability to hire somebody part-time to carry us through the sensitive period? I don't know. Do we ever do
We
that?
have a current vacancy as a PSA, and so we've been out recruiting for that for a while. I think we've got a candidate that we're trying to pull in. But that's an indication that that's been a vacancy we've had for about 2 months now.
And would that be at that location or some other location?
So that would be the intent of it.
What would be the intent of it?
That's the PSA would be at that location
Okay.
as a crossing guard. However, if we had a sickness or a vacancy, we have other crossings that have no signalization that are unprotected crossings. And so those would be the higher priority to reassign staff if we had a vacancy. And so that would be something we communicate very clearly with stakeholders as well.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we've addressed it and that the reason why we're not doing the crossing guard is that what do we say to people? We brought a safety issue to you. Everybody nodded and said it was important. So what do we say to them?
So we are moving forward with the photo enforcement to regulate speeding, which we think will also have positive impacts on red light running, which we acknowledge is a concern, but there are technical difficulties of doing both at that location. So we think that will change driver behavior on that corridor.
And in any event, you couldn't get a crossing guard in place any quicker than we could get the cameras. That's what I heard you say.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Right, other thoughts?
The affordable dwelling units, those are those 30 to 40% AMI units. And the recommendation from staff is to use affordable housing fund that we're already funding 150,000 a year. Is that right?
120.
120. Okay. So no use of the contingency necessary.
That's correct.
And 70 would not take away, this 70 would actually add to the stock of ADUs. We're not converting 60% units.
That number would follow that model
Okay.
based on that. Yeah.
Thank you. That's good news.
Ms. Conley?
And then these one-time expenses, bottom. Holiday lights, we've talked about the expenses gone up, but that's just listed as a one-time.
Until next year.
Until next year, and then it's another one-time.
So that's the startup. What the cost will be on an ongoing basis, we're guessing is gonna probably be about $50,000 to go from Washington Street all the way to Haycock. But that is 95,000 is a known number in terms of what it will cost next.
For one time. We mentioned the Tinner Hill Gateway in there. I'd like to fund that, but I think one of the things that we talked about is that Tinner Hill has a $20,000 grant that they haven't spent yet. So all this is something I would definitely like to do. I want to make sure that we're not just saying we're automatically doing that without any further discussion. We're setting it aside so that when they're ready for it, we'd like to discuss further.
And this list should just be understood as a recording of requests that have come
Okay.
in. This is
So
not a
this is
staff.
not a guarantee we're going
That's
to do all these things.
That's
These
right.
are just
Or the staff-
possibilities.
Staff recommendation. These are just.
Right.
acknowledgements of all the
And
requests.
this is not the only list. What he's trying to
Right.
say, there.
There are other
larger
lists
list
and
of
other
one-time
things.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's gonna
So
be.
that
big
was where
one.
my questioning was
Full
going.
Unfunded needs
Right.
spread.
So when we get to this budget amendment in the fall, that's when we're going to figure out all of these things. And we have heard that these are requests and we'll see where we go from there.
All right, other comments about these requests? Jessica?
I just want to clarify, my understanding when I read this, I saw we have 80,000 in contingency. There are 3 at the top under potential use of funds. And my understanding was that that's what we were discussing, whether we're going to define those specifically Monday night use of funds that way.
Yes,
Correct?
that's my understanding too.
Because watch night, you need to hire somebody right now to do it. Special events, we've already advertised, we are doing it. So probably need to have the money for that. And then that's a portion of the environmental sustainability that'll support the work we're already doing. Correct?
That's correct. So the ones at the top, we don't have an alternate strategy to fund. The ones that are listed, the ongoing things that are listed below, we have a suggestion on how they can be handled in an alternate way. So the ones at the top are the ones, if they're not funded, they won't happen.
Is there consensus about the ones at the top being appropriate?
Can you round up? I mean, do you want to give the remaining 4,000 to the environmental sustainability one? Because you got 80 available. I'm just, it's 4,000. Is it going to provide some lift somewhere?
I think that's a good, that would be my recommendation. Yes.
All right, is there consensus about that?
I have the ESC, that's a great suggestion.
So 30,000, right? And then we'll. use the
30,000, then you're at your 80,000 contingency. The balance of the discussion will be based on whatever we have left here and the spending. And then balancing that with the already existing staff requests. Yes,
And that's with the assumption that 800 is the recommendation out of reserves. So, yes,
Right, is there a consensus on that?
yes.
Sounds like there is.
yes.
It's like
Anything
that.
else to talk about tonight?
To support the city attorney, and potentially any labor relations issues. Sorry.
I think that's also, GovOps, we talked with the city attorney about that as well, because in the unfunded needs, there's full-time assistant city attorney and litigation contingency fund listed in our legislative unmet needs. So I think that's a really good point and something we discussed as she settles in and as we see what happens with that on the school side. We'll have more known dollar amounts associated with that outside litigation, not litigation, outside contingency.
All right, why don't we move on then to council schedule and committee reports and the like. Anybody have any council comments?
I want to make sure you all saw the email that came from Celeste with the invite for the Eden Center eating tour is Sunday at 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry, we just got the invite today, so it's short notice.
All right. Dave,
Yeah, I'd like to make the comment at the next public meeting. Had an opportunity to participate at the Crossman Methodist Church. Volunteers packed 8,000 meals that will be sent around the world. I was so proud the label on these boxes of all these meals say City of Falls Church, and it's going, I think, to the Philippines for further distribution in Asia. So I'd like to make a point of that and maybe invite them, or just it's literally Falls Church going to the rest of the world. And we know that a lot of our nonprofits do it on a regular basis, but I think that particular one was just an amazing thing.
Any other things to mention? All right, this is an early one. We'll take it when we can. So anything else before we adjourn? All right,
Thank you, council.
thank you. Yeah,
And that is when I first got on city council, we often spent the budget markup meeting fighting about school funding, and this is so much better. So this is another benefit of our revenue sharing agreement, is that we can focus on the things that matter for the whole city, not just little niche areas here and there. So thank you all for that.
all right, thank you. And Phil, are you still on the line? I think he may have dropped off. I wish Phil again the best of luck and hope to see him soon. All right, let's call it a night, everybody. Let's adjourn.